Pay attention to this kitchen security footage. October 12th, 2014, 5:30 p.m. You see Elena Vance, a stunning 32-year-old widow, chatting happily with a muscular black man in her home. That man is Marcus Reed, a 35-year-old plumber. As Marcus stands on the ladder fixing a light, the chemistry between them is undeniable. There is laughter, lingering glances, and flirtatious touches. At 6:45 p.m., they walk out of the frame together, disappearing into the shadows of the hallway. This is the last time Marcus Reed is seen alive. By dawn, his body is found dumped at the edge of a forest. The wine, the DNA, and the GPS on her car all scream one name: Elena. But in a house full of cameras, the real killer was the only one who knew exactly where to hide. Pay attention to the wide-angle view captured by the high-definition security camera mounted in the northwest corner of the kitchen. The date is November 14th, 2014. The location is an upscale residence in the secluded hills of Oakville, a home that smells of lavender and expensive cleaning products. The kitchen is a masterpiece of modern design, featuring expansive marble countertops and shadowless recessed lighting. Entering the frame from the left is Elena Vance. She is 32 years old, a recent widow who inherited this estate after her husband's tragic accident 2 years prior. She is wearing a silk robe that hangs loosely around her frame, suggesting an evening of solitude, yet she is not alone. Standing near the kitchen island, organizing a set of heavy wrenches and pipe fittings, is Marcus Reed. Marcus is 35, a man built with the broad shoulders and calloused hands of someone who has spent his life in manual labor. He is a plumber, well regarded in the community for his reliability and his dedication to his family. He has been called here to fix a persistent leak under the sink and replace a flickering fixture in the high ceiling. The camera captures the stark contrast between them. Elena, fluid and graceful, moving with the confidence of ownership. Marcus, respectful but imposing, his work boots stark against the pristine white tile. The interaction begins professionally. Marcus points to the ceiling fixture, gesturing with a screwdriver. Elena nods, but she does not step back to give him space. Instead, she leans against the marble island, her posture relaxed, her attention fixed entirely on him. Watch the body language shift. It is subtle at first, then unmistakable. Marcus sets up a stepladder beneath the blown bulb. As he climbs, the camera captures Elena moving closer to the base of the ladder. She is ostensibly there to steady it, though the heavy-duty aluminum frame requires no assistance. She looks up at him, saying something that makes Marcus pause in his work. He looks down, and even in the silent footage, the tension is palpable. He smiles, a guarded, polite expression that slowly softens into genuine amusement. Elena laughs, throwing her head back slightly, exposing the long line of her neck. She reaches out, her hand lingering on the calf of his leg as he descends the ladder. It is a gesture that breaches the professional boundary, transforming the atmosphere from a service call into something far more intimate. Meanwhile, 7 miles away in a modest duplex on the edge of town, the evening carries a very different weight. Sarah Reed, Marcus's wife, is sitting in a dim nursery, rocking their 10-month-old daughter to sleep. The room is cluttered with folded laundry and plastic toys, the air thick with the scent of baby powder and exhaustion. Sarah is tired. She checks the clock on the wall. It is past dinner time, and Marcus is usually home by now. He had texted earlier to say he had one last emergency call, a high-paying job that would help with the holiday bills. Sarah trusts him. She shifts the sleeping baby into the crib and steps into the hallway, exhaling a long breath of fatigue. Back in the Vance residence, the dynamic has accelerated. Marcus has packed his tools, but he does not leave. He stands by the counter where Elena has poured 2 glasses of water, or perhaps something stronger. The label is obscured by the angle of the bottle. They stand close, their shoulders almost touching. The camera records Elena whispering something close to his ear. Marcus, a man who has never had a mark on his record, looks at the door, then back at her. He seems to make a decision. The hesitation in his posture evaporates. Elena takes his hand, her fingers interlacing with his, and leads him away from the harsh lights of the kitchen. They walk toward the dark corridor on the right side of the frame. the hallway that leads to the master bedroom. At this moment, they step out of the camera's view. The kitchen is left empty, save for the tool bag Marcus left sitting on the island. At that exact second, the silence of Sarah's evening is shattered by the vibration of her phone on the kitchen table. She picks it up, expecting a message from Marcus saying he is on his way. It is not from Marcus. The number is blocked. The message is short, cruel, and precise. Your husband is fixing more than just pipes tonight. He's at 4200 Summit Drive. Go see for yourself. A map pin is attached. The blood drains from Sarah's face. She stares at the screen, her thumb hovering over Marcus's contact name. She presses call. In the empty kitchen on Summit Drive, inside the heavy canvas tool bag left on the marble counter, a cell phone screen lights up. It vibrates against the metal wrenches, a frantic, rhythmic buzzing that echoes in the silence. On the screen, the name Home flashes repeatedly. No one is there to answer it. The camera continues to record the empty room, the light on the tool bag blinking, then going dark, then blinking again. Sarah calls a second time, then a third. Her panic rises with each unanswered ring, a cold dread settling in her stomach. On the fourth attempt, the call goes straight to voicemail. In the Vance kitchen, the room remains still. The secrets of what is happening down the dark hallway hidden from the unblinking eye of the lens. The morning sun that filtered into the Vance residence on November 15th did not bring warmth. It brought a stark, revealing brightness to the scene of the previous night's encounter. When Detective Ryan Miller arrived at the estate at 8:45 a.m., responding to a frantic missing person report filed by Sarah Reed, the first thing that hit him was not the silence, but the smell. The air inside the foyer was heavy, almost suffocating, with the chemical sting of industrial-strength bleach. It overpowered the subtle notes of expensive perfume that usually lingered in the hallways. Miller found Elena in the kitchen, the same room where the camera had recorded the intimate exchange just 14 hours earlier. She was not frantic, nor did she appear to be a woman worried about a missing contractor. Instead, she was methodically scrubbing the marble countertop of the kitchen island with a vigorous, rhythmic motion, her hands encased in yellow rubber gloves that looked jarringly out of place against her cashmere attire. Miller identified himself, his eyes scanning the room. The tool bag was gone. The wine glasses were gone. The surfaces gleamed with a sterile, wet sheen. When asked about Marcus Reed, Elena stopped scrubbing and peeled off the gloves with a casual, almost bored demeanor. Her response was chillingly composed. "The plumber?" she asked, as if struggling to recall his name. "He finished around 8. I paid him cash, and he left through the back garden gate. He said something about meeting friends. I didn't ask for details." She leaned against the pristine counter, her expression unreadable. Miller pressed her, mentioning that Marcus had never returned home to his wife and infant daughter. Elena offered a small, sympathetic shrug that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Men have secrets, detective. Perhaps he wasn't the saint his wife thinks he is." It was then, as she turned to place the cleaning supplies into the cabinet under the sink, that Miller noticed the discrepancy in her appearance. Elena was dressed immaculately, but she was wearing a thick, patterned silk scarf around her neck, an unusual choice for a woman cleaning her kitchen. As she moved, the silk fabric slipped slightly to the left. For a fraction of a second, Miller saw it, a jagged, angry red scratch running horizontally across the side of her neck, just below the ear. It looked fresh. Before Miller could point it out, Elena seemed to sense his gaze. Her hand flew up, fingers brushing the silk, and she adjusted the scarf back into place, tightening the knot. "Is there anything else, detective? I have a Pilates class at 10, she said, effectively dismissing him. Miller left the house without enough probable cause for a search warrant, but the image of that scratch and the overwhelming scent of chlorine was burned into his mind. Back at the precinct, the atmosphere was less sterile, but equally tense. While Miller typed up his initial report, the name Vance began to circulate through the squad room, stirring up old ghosts. Sergeant Davis, a veteran of the force, walked over to Miller's desk and dropped a thick, dusty file next to his keyboard. "You might want to read this before you go back there," Davis said, his voice lowered. It was the case file of Richard Vance, Elena's late husband. 2 years ago, Richard had driven his Porsche off a cliff on Route 1. The investigation had ruled it a tragic accident due to brake failure, but the file was filled with notes from the original investigators who felt something was off. The station was buzzing with the renewed gossip. Officers whispered near the coffee machine about the life insurance policy, a staggering $5 million that had landed in Elena's bank account within weeks of the funeral. They spoke of her reputation in the local social circles, not as a grieving widow, but as a woman who collected men and discarded them when they ceased to be useful. "She's a black widow," one officer muttered, glancing at the whiteboard where Marcus Reed's name was now written in blue marker. "She controls them, uses them, and then something bad happens." The narrative was forming rapidly. Marcus was not just a missing plumber, he was the latest victim in a pattern of manipulation. Miller opened the old file, looking at the crime scene photos of the car crash, and couldn't shake the feeling that the scratch on her neck was the first crack in a very expensive, very dangerous facade. The breakthrough came not from the sterile labs of the police precinct, but from the damp, leaf-strewn edge of Blackwood Forest. 48 hours after Marcus Reed vanished, a hiker's dog unearthed what the cameras could not see. Marcus's body was found partially concealed beneath a pile of decaying autumn foliage, his powerful frame reduced to the stillness of a crime scene statistic. The cause of death was immediately apparent to the coroner, but it was the murder weapon that turned the stomach of Detective Miller. Tightly embedded in the soft tissue of the victim's neck was a length of braided nylon cord. It was not the rough rope of a hardware store, but a shimmering, champagne-colored tassel cord, the kind used to tie back heavy, expensive velvet drapes. Miller recognized the texture immediately. He had seen identical cords hanging in the windows of the master bedroom at the Vance estate during his brief, unauthorized glance down the hallway the previous morning. The brutality of the strangulation contrasted sharply with the luxury of the weapon, painting a picture of a crime born of sudden, violent passion within a domestic setting. Armed with this grim discovery and the probable cause established by the scratch on Elena's neck, Miller secured a search warrant and returned to Summit Drive with a full forensic team. The element of surprise was their greatest weapon. They caught Elena just as she was preparing to leave the house, her car keys in hand. The forensic sweep was swift and merciless. While Elena sat on her velvet sofa, flanked by uniformed officers, technicians combed the kitchen. Despite her frantic cleaning efforts the day before, she had made a critical error. Inside the stainless steel dishwasher, which had been loaded but never run, they found 2 crystal wine glasses. One was clean, the other contained a dried, sticky residue of red Merlot. The field test turned the reagent a dark, accusing purple. The lab would later confirm that the wine was laced with a lethal dose of benzodiazepines, a powerful sedative that would have rendered a man of Marcus's size incapacitated within minutes. The narrative was constructing itself with terrifying clarity. The seduction, the drugging, and the strangulation. The final nail in the coffin was discovered not inside the mansion, but in the mundane reality of the service alley behind it. Buried beneath bags of coffee grounds and vegetable peels in the outdoor refuse bin was Marcus Reed's cell phone. It had been shattered with a blunt object, the screen a spiderweb of cracks, but the SIM card was intact. Finding the victim's destroyed property in the suspect's own trash can eliminated any lingering doubt about where Marcus had met his end. Miller approached Elena with the evidence bag in hand. She stared at the broken phone, her face pale, her lips parting as if to speak, but no sound came out. The handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists, the metallic sound echoing through the cavernous, silent house. She was escorted out past the manicured hedges, her head bowed, not in shame, but in a daze of confusion that the officers interpreted as guilt. By the time Elena was processed at the station, the court of public opinion had already convened. The press had descended upon the story with voracious appetite. Tabloids splashed photos of Elena in her swimwear, alongside grainy images of the crime scene, running headlines like "The Black Widow of Oakville" and "The Plumber and the Predator." The narrative of the sexy, wealthy widow luring a working-class family man to his death was too sensational to ignore. Fueling this fire was the testimony of Mrs. Gable, an elderly neighbor who lived directly across from the Vance estate. She sat in the interview room, clutching her purse, and told Miller with absolute certainty that she had been awake due to her insomnia at exactly 2:19 a.m., as she had looked out her window and seen Elena's black SUV backing out of the driveway. She described the driver as a slender figure with long hair, driving with a frantic urgency, speeding away toward the route that led to Blackwood Forest. The timeline was perfect. The motive was assumed. The evidence was damning. Elena Vance was no longer just a suspect. She was the villain in a national tragedy. The holding cell at the Oakville precinct was a cold, concrete box that smelled of stale coffee and despair, a far cry from the velvet-draped luxury of the Vance estate. Elena Vance sat on the narrow cot, her knees pulled to her chest, stripping away the persona of the Black Widow that the media had constructed, leaving behind only a terrified woman who couldn't understand how her life had collapsed in 72 hours. Meanwhile, 3 floors up in the detective bureau, the silence of the night shift was broken only by the hum of the ventilation system and the rhythmic tapping of Detective Miller's keyboard. It was 3 a.m. on November 18th. Miller was exhausted, staring at the evidence board where Elena's face was pinned at the center, but a nagging instinct kept him from going home. The case felt too clean. The evidence too perfectly arranged, like a stage play where every prop was glued in place. His contemplation was interrupted by a sharp ping from his laptop. A new email had arrived in his personal inbox, bypassing the department's firewall. The subject line was blank. The sender was an alphanumeric string of nonsense. Attached was a single video file labeled kitchen_main_layer_2.mp4. Miller hesitated, then clicked the file. The video player opened, revealing the familiar high-end kitchen on Summit Drive. Time-stamped October 12th, 6:15 p.m., 30 minutes before Marcus and Elena left the frame in the original footage. At first, it looked like the same scene. The marble island, the pendant lights. But this was raw data, a hidden layer that had been overwritten by a sophisticated loop in the security system. In this version, Elena was not flirting. She had stepped away into the downstairs powder room, leaving Marcus alone near the sink, checking his phone with his back turned to the pantry. Suddenly, the bottom right corner of the screen moved. The ventilation grate on the floor, previously unnoticed in the shadows, was lifted silently from below. A figure clad entirely in black, wearing a balaclava and tactical gloves, slithered out of the crawlspace with the practiced ease of a predator. Miller leaned in, his breath hitching. The intruder didn't move toward Marcus. He moved to the wine bottle resting on the island. With a terrifying swiftness, he uncorked a small vial and tipped a white powder into the open Merlot. He swirled the bottle once, replaced it, and vanished back into the vent just seconds before the bathroom door opened and Elena returned to the frame. The video cut to black. Miller sat back, his heart hammering against his ribs. The narrative of the Black Widow shattered in an instant. Elena hadn't drugged Marcus. She was being hunted in her own home. The sophistication of the hack, the ability to splice a live feed, insert a loop to cover the intrusion, and leave no digital footprint on the main server, pointed to someone with advanced technical skills, someone who knew the house's architecture as intimately as its digital infrastructure. Miller immediately began digging into the background of the Vance family, looking for anyone with the capability to execute such a high-tech frame-up. He pulled the probate records for Richard Vance's estate, searching for contested assets or family disputes. The search returned a name that had been buried in the footnotes of the original accident investigation: David Vance. David was Richard's younger brother, a brilliant but unstable former electronics engineer who had been fired from a defense contracting firm for unauthorized surveillance of his colleagues. The file revealed a deep, festering wound. David had contested Richard's will, claiming Elena had manipulated his brother and eventually killed him to inherit the fortune, though he never had proof. He had been cut out of the inheritance entirely. Miller pulled up David's photo, a man with hollow eyes and a thin, bitter mouth. Digging deeper into the IP address logs of the smart home installation company, Miller found the link he needed. The system in Elena's house hadn't just been hacked. It had been compromised from the inside. David Vance had installed a mirror protocol months ago, a ghost system that allowed him to watch Elena's every move, learn her schedule, and wait for the perfect victim to walk through the door so he could destroy her life. The impound lot at the edge of the precinct was a graveyard of twisted metal and shattered glass, battered by a relentless November drizzle that blurred the city lights into streaks of gray. Detective Ryan Miller stood before Elena Vance's black SUV, the vehicle that had been the prosecution's smoking gun. The GPS data had been irrefutable, placing this car at Blackwood Forest at 2:19 a.m., but the video from the hidden layer had changed the physics of the investigation. Miller was no longer looking for evidence of a driver. He was looking for a ghost. He popped the hood, scanning the engine block, but found nothing. He moved to the driver's side footwell, contorting his body to shine his flashlight up into the tangle of wiring beneath the dashboard. It took 10 minutes of shifting through the factory-standard harness before he found it. Tucked behind the onboard diagnostics port was a small, matte black rectangular box, zip-tied to the ignition column. It wasn't a standard remote starter. It was a chaotic assembly of breadboard circuitry and a high-frequency receiver antenna, a crude but effective bypass module. Miller recognized the handiwork immediately. It was the signature of an engineer who knew how to make machines obey him when people wouldn't. Miller straightened up, the cold rain feeling suddenly clarifying against his flushed skin. The narrative that had condemned Elena Vance dissolved, replaced by a far more sinister chronology. David Vance hadn't just watched. He had directed the entire night like a macabre stage play. The timeline clicked into place with terrifying precision. After slithering out of the vent and spiking the wine, David must have waited in the shadows until the benzodiazepines took hold of Elena, rendering her unconscious in her own home. He had then emerged to subdue Marcus, likely striking him from behind in the blind spot of the hallway before dragging the plumber's body out to the garage. The scratch on Elena's neck wasn't from a struggle with a lover. It was likely inflicted by David himself while she was comatose, a calculated injury to simulate a fight. Then, wearing gloves and perhaps even Elena's oversized coat to fool any distant witnesses like Mrs. Gable, David had used the bypass module to drive her SUV to the forest, dump the body, and return the car. He had counted on the GPS to tell the story he wanted told, using Elena's vehicle as a weapon to frame her while she slept through the nightmare. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, the silence from the police department was becoming deafening to David Vance. From his basement apartment, surrounded by monitors that had gone dark since Miller's team quietly severed the mirror feed, David paced with frantic energy. The news cycles were still churning out stories about the Black Widow, but his police scanner had gone ominously quiet regarding the Vance case. There were no new leaks, no press conferences announcing a confession. The absence of noise terrified him. It meant the investigation had shifted its gaze. Panic, cold and sharp, began to claw at his rationality. He needed to cement the narrative. He needed one final piece of evidence that would leave no room for doubt, something so personal to the victim that its presence on Elena's property would be damning. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a worn brown leather wallet, Marcus Reed's wallet, taken from the body before it was dumped. Under the cover of a moonless night, David drove his nondescript sedan to Summit Drive, parking 3 blocks away to avoid detection. He moved through the shadows of the neighbor's hedges, clutching the wallet in his sweating palm. His plan was simple: drop the wallet into Elena's roadside mailbox, ensuring it would be found by the mail carrier or a nosy neighbor the next morning. He reached the end of the driveway, the large brick mailbox looming before him like a tombstone. He glanced left, then right. The street was empty. He opened the metal flap and slid the leather wallet inside, a twisted smile touching his lips as he imagined the headlines the next day. He turned to leave, convinced of his own genius, completely unaware that 60 yards away, inside a darkened utility van parked near a hydrant, A telephoto lens shutter clicked silently. Detective Miller wasn't there, but his surveillance team was. They watched the ghost materialize, recording every frame of the man who thought he was pulling the strings, not realizing the net had already closed around him. The takedown was not the quiet, tactical arrest Detective Miller had hoped for. When the surveillance units closed in on the mailbox, David Vance bolted, his desperation fueling a chaotic, high-speed flight that turned the sleepy streets of Oakville into a siren-wailing war zone. He rammed his sedan past the unmarked van, screeching onto the main avenue, weaving through oncoming traffic with a reckless disregard for life that mirrored the crumbling state of his psyche. The pursuit lasted 12 harrowing minutes, ending only when Miller's cruiser executed a precision PIT maneuver near the highway on-ramp, spinning David's vehicle into the guardrail. Dragged from the smoking wreckage, David was screaming not about his rights, but about Elena, spitting vitriol about how she had stolen his brother's legacy, his voice cracking with the hysteria of a man whose intricate web had finally snapped back to strangle him. If David's arrest was chaotic, the search of his basement apartment provided the chilling silence of absolute clarity. Miller kicked open the door to what looked like a standard living space, but behind a locked door in the back was a room that made even the veteran officers recoil. It was a shrine to obsession, a claustrophobic space papered entirely with photographs of Elena Vance. There were thousands of them. Elena grocery shopping, Elena reading in her garden, and most disturbingly, grainy screenshots taken from the hacked interior cameras of her sleeping in her bed. Taped over the photos were handwritten schematics timelines of her schedule, blueprints of her security system, and a manifesto detailing his plan. It wasn't just about framing her. He had drafted letters to the district attorney, scripts for anonymous tips, and even a draft of a victim impact statement he planned to read at her sentencing. He hadn't just wanted her arrested. He wanted to orchestrate her complete destruction as vengeance for the brother he believed she had taken from him. The exoneration of Elena Vance came swiftly in the eyes of the law, but painfully slowly in the eyes of the world. She walked out of the precinct 48 hours later. The charges dropped with prejudice, but the mob outside did not cheer. The cameras that had once filmed her flirting now zoomed in on her exhaustion. The district attorney released the full, unedited context of the kitchen video to the press, the footage showing the friendship, the laughter, and the terrifying moment the intruder emerged from the vent. The narrative shifted from the Black Widow to the tragic victim, but the damage was indelible. The public now knew Marcus Reed was innocent, a good man who died because he was in the wrong place at the wrong time, but they also couldn't unsee the intimacy of that initial clip. Elena was no longer a murderer, but she was forever branded as the catalyst for a tragedy, the beautiful woman whose very existence seemed to invite death. A week later, the Vance estate was silent. The police tape was gone, the cleaners had finished their work, and the scent of bleach had faded. Elena stood in the center of the modern kitchen, the expansive room feeling more like a mausoleum than a home. The late afternoon sun hit the marble island where Marcus had stood, where they had shared a joke just moments before his life was extinguished. She looked up at the corner of the ceiling. The small, blinking red light of the security camera stared back at her. The unblinking eye that had recorded her privacy twisted her reality and ultimately saved her life, only to leave it in ruins. She realized with a crushing weight that her desire for privacy, her guarded lifestyle, had been the canvas upon which David painted his monster. Her beauty and her isolation were not shields. They were the weapons he had used against her. Slowly, Elena dragged a chair to the corner of the room. She climbed up, reaching toward the lens. She didn't smash it. She simply took a piece of heavy black electrical tape and pressed it firmly over the glass, blinding the machine. She stepped down, the room plunging into a metaphorical darkness even as the sun still shone. There was no victory here. Across town, Sarah Reed was burying a husband who died for a plumbing job. And here, in the silence of her mansion, Elena Vance was alive, but the woman who had laughed in that video was gone, replaced by a ghost who knew that the truth doesn't always heal. Sometimes it just explains why you're bleeding. The story of Elena Vance and Marcus Reed is a chilling reminder that sometimes the things designed to protect us can be turned into weapons against us. It teaches us that truth is often far more complex than a 30-second video clip or a headline in the papers. We judged Elena based on what we thought we saw, but we missed the monster hiding in the shadows. The lesson for us: all we live in an age of surveillance and instant judgment. It is easy to look at a snippet of someone's life, a photo, a video, a rumor, and decide who they are. But as this story proves, context is everything. A smile can just be a smile. A gesture of kindness can be twisted into evidence of guilt. We must learn to look deeper, to wait for the whole truth before we condemn the innocent. Safety and prevention. In a world where our homes are increasingly connected, digital safety is just as important as physical safety. Secure your network. Always change default passwords on cameras and smart devices. Use complex, unique passwords for every device. Two-factor authentication. Enable this on every security app you use. Physical checks. Occasionally check your home for unusual devices or signs of tampering, especially if you have had service workers or estranged family members with access. Trust your instincts. If something feels off, like a car parked too long on your street or a glitch in your electronics, don't ignore it. Join the community. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please share it with your friends and family. It might just make them think twice about their own security. Subscribe to the channel for more true crime stories that uncover the darkness hiding in plain sight. A prayer for safety. We pray that you and your loved ones are always safe, that your homes remain sanctuaries of peace, and that you are protected from the eyes of those who wish you harm. May the truth always come to light in your lives. If you believe in the power of truth and protection, please type Amen in the comments below. Stay safe, and see you in the next chapter.